So I'm Dr. Erin Chaparro. I'm from the University of Oregon, and you are here at Aligning PBIS and MTSS Initiatives. And so how many of you are actively working to align PBIS and MTSS right now as we speak? You're like multitasking in your brain while you're here. I know you are. I know I am too. So, well, that's wonderful. So a lot of you are doing that work. And if we could see just a show of hands by how many of you are doing that work at the district level, raise your hand. Okay, maybe 37.2%. And then how many of you are doing that at the regional level, like regional agencies, smaller amount, maybe 5.7%? Okay, and then how many of you are doing at the state level, state policy and all that kind of stuff? Good, wow, quite a few of you actually. That's great. That looked like, I don't know, 11.3%, something like that? Okay. That's great. Well, wonderful. So we're super excited. I'm sure that many of you could actually jump up here and tell some of the stories and your lessons learned and all of this. We want to share some resources with you. We only have an hour, and we know that this is a big topic. We could go a lot of different directions. There's a lot of resources out there, so we want to just share those resources with you so that you can go ahead and access those resources later. And you know, when we're doing the turn and talk, feel free to get each other's email addresses so that you can make connections and then follow up with each other as you are doing this really important work. So I am so blessed and thrilled to be here with Dr. Lisa Powers, Dr. Steve Goodman. Y'all, these are legends in doing just iconic work for our field. They've been doing it for a long time, and so it's just a really big privilege for me to be here with them. They'll introduce themselves a little bit more as we get into it. As I've said, I'm at the University of Oregon. I led Oregon's MTSS initiative from 2010 to 2015. Leading 22 school districts implementing MTSS there. And then in 2016, I wrote a state grant. We got $5 million to come to Oregon Department of Education to fund MTSS coaches across the regions to build our regional capacity. And as a part of that work, we really focused at the district level and then at the state level. And that ended in 2020. And I'm sorry to say that I'm still learning about sustainability because of so much turnover at the state level. Some of that work has gone away, but fortunately, many of the school districts where we did this work is still continuing on, so I'm super excited about that. I do want to say that we have we want to say thank you to some of our contributors. So folks have shared some of their resources and PowerPoint slides with us. And then also we have some district partners that Lisa went ahead and spoke to, and they gave us some good information about how they do things in their schools. And at the end of the presentation, we will share a link to the podcast that Lisa produced as a result of the interviews she did for this presentation and for the podcast, focus on alignment of MTSS and PBIS. So super excited about that. So thank you to Dr. Cassetta Brown, Dr. Jessica Meisenhower, Lauren Weisler, and Danielle Starkey. I feel like you all are my celebrities because I was watching the videos that Lisa put together and that our other colleague put together. So we've got 3 learning objectives for you today. Thinking about exploring the aligning of initiatives and the different areas to focus on in that. Discuss alignment barriers and how to address these challenges, and then share what the core features of those alignment features are with your colleagues. So just a few things to highlight here before we jump in. One is that this whole idea of sustained implementation. So sustained and intentional implementation is one of my new favorite phrases, that we're really doing this very intentionally, and by doing it intentionally, we get to those sustained outcomes. But we're focused on all the features of PBIS being embedded, featured, planned, and integrated into all aspects of the district organization. And you heard it today with Dr. Ruthie up there talking to us about the importance of the district work in order to support the work that she was doing at the school building level. So I was really thrilled she was making those connections. So district capacity for sustained implementation of multiple initiatives, is what you all are going through right now, is often strained because of competition for existing resources. And when we say resources, we're talking about funding, we're talking about people, we're talking about time, so the whole kit and caboodle. So that's one thing I think we'll be highlighting today, talking about those resources, how to maximize those resources. Steve Goodman's going to talk about the funding piece in particular, the dollars and cents of it. And so one thing we want you to know, though, is that there is a new a PBIS district practice guide that just came out focused on the district implementation. So we'll highlight, basically today's presentation is going to highlight some of those features of the practice guide so that you'll have that as a reference for going forward. So let's just do our very first Think, Pair, and Share. And my question for you is, where are you seeing the strain in your system of implementing these PBIS and MTSS at the same time? Where are you seeing the strain? Introduce yourself to your neighbor, tell them where you're at. We'll do just a quick three-minute Think, Pair, Share. Go team. Okay, go ahead and wrap up what you're saying to your partners. Tell your partner, thank you for the conversation. And we'll go ahead and come back in 3, and 2, and 1. Thank you all so much. I'm so impressed just by walking around and listening to the conversations, just the depth of knowledge and the experience you all have. And that, this awareness that we're all in this together. No one has all the answers when it comes to this work, certainly. So that's why it takes this collective group think time to really get to the bottom of it. So as I mentioned, there is a brand new, literally hot off the press, the PBIS Center staff was working around the clock to get this thing out. It is not one of the briefs, it's a guide. It's just 125 pages long. As Brandy said, we like long titles. It's hard. Actually, it used to be, I think it was like 156. So, there was some editing in there. Lisa actually did a lot of the work to provide what we call call-out boxes that have guiding questions for you. So basically, our suggestion, there's so much information about alignment in the practice guide. But our suggestion is to look at the practice guide, choose the topic that you're needing some support in. Don't try to read it from page 100 and 125 unless you're having sleeping issues. So, just choose the section you need help with and then find those guiding question call-out boxes. Just that, if you're feeling stuck, think of it as like a non-chat GPT generated helper where you'll actually get some good guidance and get some good thought-provoking questions to bring back to your team. One of the things that you'll see is that this, I think this should be our alternative tattoo. That, we talk a lot about the concentric circles being the tattoo, but I think that this is a great one, especially for those of you at leadership levels. But these are really what we consider the drivers of implementation. So as you're considering alignment of PBIS and MTSS, you want to think about how are we aligning our training? How are we aligning our coaching? How are we aligning our evaluation? And you want to go through each one of these areas to think about what are the messages that we're sharing, what are the forms we're asking our staff to fill out in these areas, and what is the sustained, I had the joy of talking to a colleague, Emily, from Springfield Public Schools, who we used to work with more, or I used to work with more closely, but she was just telling me about how their training, how embedded it is that they know that they are always going to have new staff. They're always going to have staff turnover. So they always are planning and have a plan for integrating new people into the systems that include PBIS and MTSS alignment. The other resource we want to tell you about is mtss.org. This is kind of, as Brandy mentioned, one of our sister technical assistance centers. Steve Goodman is also very involved in this center, but they've got a lot of information about integrated systems. And this is really more of a research and development center, where the Center on PBIS is more of a technical assistance center there to provide professional learning. So it's a really nice partnership, and we're really looking forward to some of the tools coming out there. But take a look there, especially if you're trying to make the case for integration with other people within your systems. I'm going to skip ahead here, but this is basically the PBIS district practice guide. This is what you'll look for, and it gives you those big, broad areas that basically you could think of as chapters, but focus starting with the district systems fidelity inventory. That's really the overarching framework. How many of you at the district level have implemented or tried to administer the district fidelity the district systems fidelity inventory in your settings? Raise your hands high and hold them up there for a second. Okay, so like 19.2%, something like that. So I know, I'm sorry, I'll stop with this dumb joke. But but so that, you know, it's a good number of you, but that's something that if you're just getting started, the DFSI is a great resource to, it's in a way you could think of it just as a starting point, as a checklist. Maybe don't go too deep into it, but think about these are the areas that we need to identify. Another great resource on our website is the IAS MTSS trial, key takeaways for district and state leaders. Again, this is a good information piece if you're out there and you need a pamphlet to give to your colleagues who you're doing this work with. It's got some good data there. So with that, I'd love to introduce Dr. Lisa Powers from the University of Missouri, and she's going to talk to us about training and coaching.
Good morning. I'm going to start with a little bit about myself, but the part that might be relevant. When I'm a classroom teacher by trade, PBS coach, then I moved into sort of the district work. Steve Goodman was my idol back then, and we used to have breakfast conversations about how do we look at this PBS work with academics as well. Because children who were struggling academically were also often struggling behaviorally, and we were working in separate systems. So it's exciting to be here today to begin to talk about these things together. The other thing, and just raise your hand if anybody in state district schools now have personnel or staff that have an MTSS coordinator, coach, some sort of, oh, look at that's higher than what we've had it, so it's about 25% of us. I think that's pushing us to begin to think about how do we do these things differently. Because for my friends in St. Louis County, they've pushed me forward because I've always had the PBIS hat. But I've always wanted to look in this other way. So we're going to say right now we don't know all the answers, but we are getting some ideas of how we can start to integrate this work meaningfully. One of the things we want to highlight today is start small and strategically and thoughtfully. But now that we're hiring people with MTSS coach titles, what does that even mean? What do we even do? How do we even use that resource to blend these things together? So that's kind of what we're talking about today. The first thing we're going to invite you to do is think about exploring what your current state is, your existing state, and see how integrated you might already be and what are your priorities. So one idea might be is to look at your current professional development plan at the school, district, region, or state level. What are you doing in academics and behavior and social emotional? And are any of those things connected? Do they match your district's, state, region's priorities and goals? Which things are aligned there in your current professional development plan? Can you name those things? And then you can go a little deeper and begin to look at, so what are the practices that and systems and data that we're using in each of these professional development priorities we've identified in the district? Because that could be one starting point to begin to align. Thinking about your district leadership teams, here's our reality from where I work and what I see, may be different than what you see, is that we tend to have a district team for PBIS, and then we have an academic department that plans for behavior. Does that match a little bit about how you all work? I see some thumbs up and head nodding. So how can the planning pieces start to move together? So when you think about your district team, do you have academic behavior and social emotional expertise planning together? If you don't, that may be one thing to do, and or invite yourself, if you're a PBIS leader, to sit on an academic team. And then the other thing is, how are we deciding and identifying our evidence-based practices in a shared framework? When do we know they're repetitive? When we talk about effective teaming, I do a lot of support in some of the Nebraska smaller school districts, and they have an MTSS team and a PBIS team, and they're saying, we're doing the same things, same operating procedures in both. So how can we work together and maybe have conversations that are linked? The idea would be to create a common language between your academic, social, emotional, and behavioral. So for example, one of the districts we work with, in the behavior side, we often say pre-corrects or prompts, and then in the academic side, they've been taught precision requests. They're the same practice, but they have different labels. So we need to move our PBS practice to precision requests to get alignment. So those are the types of conversations you can have when you're working together at the table. And then what data to use, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The center has a PBIS blueprint that is under revision. I just want to highlight a couple things that are being considered as this gets revised that may be helpful. We have a set of guiding questions that help for when you plan your PD and as you think about where you are in this process. Are you getting ready, getting started, and getting better? And how do you think about planning for each of those phases as you move to integrate? Instead of integrating everything at one time, how do we think thoughtfully about what we're going to integrate? The other piece in the blueprint is how do we think about what do all staff need, what do some staff need, and what do a few staff need? Have you ever been to those professional development sessions and you're sitting in there and this doesn't relate to me at all, or I don't know how it's connected, or I've heard it 4 times? We want to be very thoughtful because we don't have as much time as we used to have with teachers and with staff. So we want to make sure it's meaningful and connected. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways in which districts are thinking about choice as being a way to make sure it's more meaningful. The other piece, when we think about training and coaching, how are we looking at our materials so that, again, they're aligned and that we're using common language and that they're connected? Anyone attend the facilitated discussion for districts yesterday? Because there was just a brilliant answer in there related to this. Okay, you were there? Okay, so I apologize, I can't remember the leader's district or name, but I will always remember what she said. She is a PBS district coordinator or coach in a district, and they were looking at their training and professional development. And you may relate to this, because we see this all the time. We adopted a new math curriculum, so we have no time for behavior, social, emotional. Ever hear anything like that? Okay. So that's what she heard. So they didn't have any time. So what she did is she is sitting in every math training that they're doing, and she is then inserting what you might need behaviorally. And it's easy. Watch. You all have manipulatives now for math. What's the routine and procedures for storing, getting manipulatives? If we don't think about those pieces, what'll happen, right? Oh, now we're working in groups versus working independently. How are we teaching children how to get along, listen, accept other people? You see how she could just blend it? Now, it took a lot of her time, but it makes sense where she's beginning to integrate these things. And in the end, that's going to be great for teachers because they're going to have what they need in the field. So thinking about materials and how you might connect those things as part of your training. The other piece is, how do you look at your district assessment calendar? This is from our friends in the Ferguson-Florissant School District. I think Colette is here. She's been a stellar thought partner to push me to think academic and behavior. But one of the things you want to think about is how do you take your data calendar and then align it to your professional development so that when teachers have professional development time or days, that they can actually be looking at the data that you've collected. And you can begin to look at multiple data sources together. So how do you think about, let's say you're taking your school culture and climate survey and you're taking your benchmarks for literacy, how do you start to then maybe look at those things at the same time and together? And you could look at your assessment calendar to say, do we have any assessments for social emotional behavior in there? We typically have a lot of assessments for academics. What are our plan for assessing our integrated work? And then once you have your assessment calendar identified, how do you use that data for planning your professional development, short-term and long-term? So what have we learned across our districts or across our schools? What is common that everyone might need? And then where might we need to differentiate? One of the districts we work with, and I think this is just brilliant, but each month the principal reports back to the district. They have a school professional development plan. They use the TFI to guide their work, and then they have their professional development is not days out, but it's pushed in their PLCs. One of the things the principal reports up is, this is our plan, this is our focus for the year, this is what's working for us, here's what we need next. And then at the district leadership team meetings, they look at the needs of all the schools, and they make sure that the training materials or briefs or videos or whatever they need to extend learning in that area is given to them so that they can use it. So not everybody's getting the same thing. Each school is getting what they need, but the training and coaching team is developing those resources for them to be able to deliver it, where before they might have provided a training and then had everybody come to it. So they're working more customer service and using their data for decision making in that development. Again, we talked about this. I don't know how many of you started where we had 2 full days together with a team and an administrator at the table, and we got to have training across 3 years. Those days are gone, at least in my world. Maybe you still have all those days. If not, we have summertime in which we can kind of do that kind of thing. But even then, we have to pay teachers, and it's hard. But how do we think what our big plan, our scope and sequence still might be across 3 years or across 5 years? Where are we trying to get to? And then when are we going to start integrating these pieces together? We talked a little bit about different staff. How do you think about all your staff across your district and what they will get when? So if you're thinking about effective classroom practices, which Erin and I talked about yesterday, how are you giving that to new teachers at the start of the year if you've already done it this year, or pieces of it this year? What does the counselor need to know and counseling staff need to know and be able to do related to that area? So thinking about your priorities in the district connected to the district goals and outcomes, who's going to get what when? One of the things that we see schools and districts are moving to is forming PLC groups, time in which professionals can get together. And one of the things we want you to think about that is, how do you structure that in a way that it's productive? So how we know peers getting together. We have an MTSS group in the St. Louis area where we bring in leaders that are doing this work across districts, and they present their challenge or problem, and then we work together. We work through some of the tools from the national centers, and then we talk about how does that work in your context. But they are working and learning for each other. Some of the things we've done, I think that's helped to make it somewhat successful, because we were only going to do it a year and we're in year 3 because they keep wanting to come back, is we've planned time for them to get together. So thinking about if you're going to do this, it's scheduled out, it's planned, it's timed. Topics are decided, but then they're flexible enough based on the needs and the data. And then you want to think about how is the training and the input connected to the coaching and how we help when we move towards implementation. What does the coaching look like? How do you develop coaching functions within your schools and districts? Who's going to help us when we run into a problem, when we need guidance, when we need someone to model it for us? Who's going to create the tools and resources and job aids that we can use to apply this in our setting? Some of us might be real fluent right away. Who's going to help us when I really struggle? I don't understand what it looks like in my school, in my context. So we want to think about existing staff to do this work, because my guess is not very many schools or districts are going to hire coaches specifically for this work. So who might be able to do that? And then this is just an example of what it might look like to differentiate that coaching support across schools. And some of the districts we're working in, they already know these schools want and need more support, so we're there more on site more frequently. These schools, we check in regularly, and if they need anything, but they're going pretty well on their own, we invite other schools to go visit their work and see how it's what they've aligned is working. And this is just a sample of one school's outline plan for the year. And one of the pieces we're really kind of talking about right now is how is special education part of your bigger plan? So if you're talking about literacy, how is special education also involved in that? And then when you think about the behavior pieces, how are they maybe kind of a dual purpose for you because they know quality instruction as well as behavior? What would that look like? So we're going to give you a chance again to meet somebody, continue the conversation you had, or meet somebody new. Stop and jot down what connections are you making to this conversation? What might be one next step that you would take back to your team, school, region, or district? And then Erin's going to come back and chat again. So take about 3 minutes.
And please go ahead and tell your partner thank you. And wrap up what you're saying. All right, and we are coming back in 3, in 2, in 1. Thanks so much, everyone. Sorry to wrap you up. I know your conversations are so engaging, but y'all, we only have an hour. So we got to really move. And I also just want to say, Lisa and I did not plan our outfits today. I don't know if you noticed, we're both wearing vests and blouses, but we kind of had to chuckle. We'll have to make like one of those TikTok memes about your colleague coming to work with the same outfit. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about workforce capacity a little bit. And this is a big area that's highlighted within this new practice guide that's out. So I'm not going to go into super detail or anything, but please know there's lots of good resources there, and there is research to show that the performance of central office staff is related to teaching and learning outcomes. So sometimes, you know, if we're in the building, we think, oh, what they're doing at the district doesn't impact me, and you know, sometimes a little vice versa. But there is a relationship there. There is a correlation between that when we make the changes at the central office, that those changes do trickle down to the school buildings in these other areas, you know, collaborative problem solving, shared resources, et cetera. As I mentioned, I was leading the Oregon. In Oregon, we called it, it wasn't MTSS, it was Effective Behavioral Instructional Support System, so it was the PBIS initiative. And, you know, that Shakespeare quote comes to mind of, a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. And so, you know, sometimes it's not so much what we call it, it's what we're doing. And that we're really clear in that communication. So in Oregon, it was PBIS, but for all intents and purposes, it was our MTSS initiative. And this was a lot of voices around the table to come up with what we said was our teaming framework. And so at the top, it started with a district implementation team. And that district implementation, so every district participating in the statewide initiative had to have a district implementation team. And they had to have someone with PBIS expertise at that team meeting, and they had to have someone with literacy expertise. They had to have a leadership point person, so a district administrator who held some purse strings that could make authoritative decisions as far as budgets go. And then other members from across the district, teachers, special ed, specialists. So usually those teams were about 10 people. Sometimes they were a little bit bigger. Sometimes they were a little bit smaller, depending on the district. But one of the people I wanted to highlight here is this role that we really clearly defined for our Oregon work, and it was called the systems coach. And this isn't a role you typically hear of, like, oh, we're hiring a systems coach. You know, is that a tech position? What is that? You know, you think of systems administrators more in the tech world. But really what this was a person who was already at the district level, who had a portion of their time, employee time, FTE, designated to do this systems alignment work. So as part of the initiative, they had to have a person who was 20% of their time was dedicated towards looking at the alignment between PBIS and literacy practices. And then the grant helped to cover that 20% of the person's time. There was expected job responsibilities that went along with that, facilitating meetings, and making sure this communication, these yellow boxes here say improvement cycles and communication loops. And the systems coaches really were facilitating the communication between the schools that were doing the work and then the district that was trying to build the procedures and the policies to support the work. So that communication was super duper important. I gave a presentation recently and someone came up to me afterwards and he said, "I think I'm the systems coach." I was like, yeah, I think you are too. Welcome to the club. And I just wanted to show you, this is one district, one of the districts in our state of Oregon that's really been leading this work for a long time. They started with PBIS working closely with Dr. George Sagai. Oh, are you guys from Tiger Tualatin? Awesome. Oh, I'm so thrilled. So this is, and actually I want to come back and get more data to see how it's going. But this is the work they started doing. Carol Sadler, one of my co-authors on this chapter, was a school psychologist at the district level who had a vision for how behavior and academic could work together. She got district administrators' involvement. She got Dr. George Sagai to come to their district and work with them directly. They wrote a peer-reviewed article back in 2008 together about the transformative work that PBIS was having in Tiger Tualatin School District. But they started with their data, and the short story is here that they had to look, as Ruthie was talking about, you know, your data is only so good. You got to really dig down and look at, are all of our students being served by the practices that we have in place? And they looked at Latino students versus the majority white students in the district, and they found that they had a huge achievement gap. And so over time, they really started working on practices. They really doubled down on coaching, instructional. Are you guys instructional coaches by any chance? No, okay. They really doubled down on instructional coaching. Sally Helton was one of the other lead coaches there, and they looked at that coaching. They basically didn't send anyone out of the district for a training or anything unless it was aligned with their tiered systems of support, with their really strong literacy instruction. And this actually carried up all the way to the high school as well. And there's a great video online that talks about their high school implementation. But you can see how long it took, but that they did see that growth over time. So really dramatic and this is really, I would say 09-10 is really when they got so strong in their coaching. So it takes time, it takes sustained implementation, but just to give you a little bit of inspiration of what's possible. I just want to mention to you all that one way to build sustainability for workforce capacity is through your job descriptions. So making sure that maybe one task you have when you leave here is to look at your posted job descriptions in your district, in your buildings, in your state, for how are we representing our vision and our focus for aligned initiatives for PBIS and MTSS? Are we asking our district administrators in their interviews, what are your experiences with exploration and implementation of MTSS for academic achievement and social emotional behavior? Provide examples. Are we asking them as a district leader, what is your role in supporting high quality implementation of tier systems? You know, you get the idea. The practice guide has a number of suggested interview questions that you can include for these different roles and principals and then teachers as well. The last thing I want to bring up is this idea of staff retention and sustainability. And we all know that morale is really a big issue right now for our teaching workforce and really for everyone in our schools these days. It's at the front of our minds. And oftentimes when we're developing our PBIS and our MTSS systems, the staff recognition system is like the last thing to be considered and the last thing to be developed. And right now, more than ever, we got to put that at the front of our planning for our workforce capacity sustained implementation. Because we're investing in all the people in our buildings to get that training so that we are getting those outcomes that we want. We want to make sure that they stay with us. So think about these reinforcement plans, you know, determine just like you do with your students, determine the criteria, frequency, and method of recognition. Ask the staff how they want to be recognized, just like we want to ask the students how they want to be recognized. And consider including higher rates of acknowledgement when you're adopting new initiatives. So just a couple things to think about with workforce capacity. And with that, I just want you all to have the wisdom of Dr. Steve Goodman. So I'm going to pass it off to him. And while he's coming up here, I also want to tell you, because he's too humble to say himself, that he literally wrote the book on this. It's called Integrated Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, Blending RTI and PBIS. And if you haven't seen that book, you should get it. It's great, especially, oh, good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
You're very kind, and you get me confused with somebody else. So that's and for the book, that was really Kent's brilliance. But my name's Steve. I'm from Michigan. Work for Connecticut. I've been there twice in my life, but so I got the opportunity to do just wonderful work with colleagues, Lisa and Aaron from the PBIS Center. So I was a director for Michigan's project for 22 years at the state level, and what we tried to do is to look at how we can blend the academic and behavior together, but also how we can, I'm pushing buttons here, so thank you. And also how we can connect this with larger systems, but also how we can pay for it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about aligning funding and the implementation of multi-tiered frameworks. I would suggest the first thing we need to look at is why to do it. And certainly you heard from the research that it is a good thing to get outcomes for students. I also want to suggest it's a good return on investment. And there's a lot of information coming out now around return on investment. We know it costs to implement. So Catherine Bradshaw and her colleagues have done multiple studies looking at how much it costs and how much you can get that return on investment. And if you're interested, I have all these research studies. I'd be happy to share if you don't have access to it. You can see on the left side, this is how much it would cost per student or per school or per district. On the right side is where I'm really interested in. When you look at improvement on standardized scores, if you implement positive behavior interventions and supports with fidelity, you can see for test scores for 100 students, a return for $138,658 per elementary student schools and $71,440 for secondary schools. So that's a pretty good return on investment, right? It costs to do things in it, but reduction in aggressive and disruptive behavior, $166,028. These are numbers that your finance people get interested in, and because it's hard to find teachers, it's hard to the ESSER funds are moving away, right? So how do we look at things differently? Jessica Swain Bradway and colleagues looked at every dollar you invest in school-wide positive behavior support, you get a return of about $104 in back. And I don't know if you've seen, is Bob Putnam in here? Bob Putnam did a poster last night, if you happen to see that, and he's showing that you get a $20 return for every dollar invested. So we see a range, but the idea is there's more ROI, right? It's an effective way to move that forward. If you're looking at aligning funding, we need to make sure that we are looking at the whole return on investment, because why should we invest in this? It's because it works and it makes a difference. The other thing I wanted to suggest is that when we started out, people say, we love this work, give us money to do it. And we said, we don't have enough money to do everything that you want. In Michigan, we had 3,400 schools. So that's about 810 districts. We don't have enough money to do all that. But there are funding streams out there. And so I'm kind of weird. You know how some people collect precious moments and things? I collect funding guides for, so I've got some vintage things I can trade for you, but I get some pretty late. But if you're interested, there are some guides. So we looked in Michigan at what Washington State was doing for funding. There is something from Rutgers on looking at how do you fund response to intervention. And we took some of that information, and some brilliant colleagues in Michigan created a guide for that as well. How it works is it looks at each of the components. So what is the training? What are the profession development activities that need to be in place? And it lists out, so if you're receiving Title I, you can't really see it back there, but Title I Part A, different title programs for it. It can say this may be allowable costs for using those title funds for it. Now, what we had to be very careful is, don't take our word for it because we're not finance people. Talk to your federal people at the state, who do our federal programs there. Talk to them about, see what works. We even, for Michigan, said, well, there's legislated funds from Michigan that may be able to help support this as well. So we're looking at trying to braid this with existing funding streams of what would be working and what would not be. When we're evaluating new systems, are you familiar with the implementation research? So the hexagon tool, we modified it a little bit with the idea of how do you investigate new funding areas to say, would this be helpful for our work? And what we're suggesting is we can break it down into, is it the right thing to do? Or can we do it in the right way? So when we're going to saying, is this a grant we should be going forward, working with our business office, working with our state and federal people, we can say, well, is the need there? Does it fit in the priority alignment? Does it fit with what we're trying to accomplish through our strategic plan? Is it doable for the requirements? Because some of the things that we see are a lot of work, for a little bit of money. Or this way, can we do it in the right way? Meaning that, do we have the internal capacity, or can we purchase the internal capacity for it? Or do we have the external supports, and do we have the external supports for it? So given that idea, it may be that we can go through and say decisions, well, is there opportunity for improvement of services, our MTSS, our PBIS? If yes, then let's look at that innovation or that activity that we can start funding. If no, let's not do that, because it's a lot of work to write those grants. Or to investigate, to be the accountability for grants that you may be getting already. Did the outcome improve the implementation? So should we continue innovation? Should we continue that funding stream? Should we invest more into that work? Or should we reallocate funds? One of the things that we've been talking about in other sessions is that we have so many initiatives that we're trying to do in education. We can't do it all, right? So what can we take away so that we can make room? Taking it away also reallocates the funds for it. So when you're deselecting, you can take those funds that were previously used and align it for some of the work that you're doing. Another thing that we have done, so when I worked at the state, I'm not allowed to talk to the governor, right? So there's the kind of thing, not that she'd want to talk to me, but there's those levels, right? We don't talk. But I think one of the things that we have found is when there was change in new administrative, governor level, superintendent level, whatever, what we did was we looked at what were the educational components of the platform, what were the primary interest areas that people had, and then we went through and said, this is how MTSS would help with that. So if there's already key priorities that a new superintendent's coming in, because you can hear some of that during the interview process. You can hear what the school board's interested in for the policies. What we try to do is show that alignment, that if you're funding this, if you want to move forward with this program, MTSS, PBIS can really help you to make it better. So we make it very explicit of how these are connecting. The other thing, final thing I want you to consider is I think there's different funding opportunities or different purposes depending on a category or purpose that we're trying to connect. So for example, if you are just trying to start out, we suggest start out with pilot programs, start out with model demonstrations. If you can't make it work in a small area, there's no way you're going to make it work, scale up a whole wide. You need to show that you can make it work in a small level. So for that, we say initial funding, try it out in a proof of concept or a pilot, and the outcomes, is it feasible for further investment? For replications, once you have model demonstrations, can we get it to work in other areas? So that is a kind of a different type of funding idea. And so it's possible, can we replicate in other contexts, populations, locations? Sustaining, keeping it going, and certainly as the word implies, these things don't just say, yeah, that's a great idea, we're going to do it forever. We see it's about 18 months is the common initiative that Lantham and others have found. After 18 months, people get excited about something new and try something out. So different funding, I'd like you to consider this when you're talking about aligning things. For the pilot phase, it costs a lot to do those model demonstrations because you may not have the training structures in place. You may have to do a whole lot of development of your coaching. You have to purchase the materials. So the cost per unit, cost per school is a lot. But as we go for the scale up, the cost per unit goes down because you got the structures in place, right? But I would suggest the overall cost goes up. So the cost per unit goes down, but the overall, because you have many more units, right? Many more schools implementing. I think when we're trying to align, we need to figure out what level are we at for this phase, and then how do we talk to our providers to say, yes, our funders, yeah, we're at this phase, it's going to cost a lot initially, but as we scale up, the per unit cost will go down. So I'm going to pass it back on to... Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. We're going to close out with, yep, we're good, thank you. Just 3 big ideas as you walk away today. Think about looking at your professional development plan, thinking about looking at your hiring practices, and then looking at your funding streams. Might be something to consider. We do have, and we're missing a picture, we're missing Danielle's picture, but I know she's here, so we can just look at her. She's right there in the middle. We do have virtual guest speakers. Because we had such a short time, we videotaped them, but they're going up on our next week's podcast. So you can listen to behind the scenes how 4 MTSS leaders in different districts, Nebraska and Missouri, have rolled out this work. So the podcast will be up next Wednesday, and you can hear from them. And this is a time for questions. 5 minutes for questions. Yes. Okay, so what are some common examples between academics and behavior for common language? Go ahead. Tier 1, just even talking about tiers. Yep. What are some other links? Effective instruction. What are your components of effective instruction in literacy? What are your components of effective instruction in social, emotional, behavioral? Other ideas? We'll keep thinking. Progress monitoring, thank you. We do that almost better in academics than we sometimes do that in behavior, so we can learn from each other. That's the whole key, right? But you're thinking good and thinking connected. Other thoughts, questions, or anything that you're doing that you'd want to share back with us? Universal screeners, screening for academic and screening for behavior, and both of those screening sources can be looked at to improve practices in academics and behavior. Nice job. Yep, nice connection. We'll be around. We know you need to check out and get to the next section, but if you have questions, we'll be up front, and feel free to come on up. Thank you for your time today.